You ever have one of those mornings where your coffee burns your tongue, your cat throws up in your shoe, and a woman in athleisure tries to have your truck towed because, in her words, it brings down the visual value of the neighborhood? Yeah, that was my Tuesday. I was still rubbing the sleep out of my eyes when I heard the backup beep of a tow truck in my driveway. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac where the loudest noise usually comes from Phil's sprinkler system hissing like it's got opinions, so naturally, I thought I was dreaming. But no. There was a tow truck, angled nose in like a heat-seeking missile, already half-lifted under my beat-up F-150. And standing beside it, sipping a green smoothie and barking into her Bluetooth like she was orchestrating a hostage negotiation, was Karen. Not a Karen. The Karen. HOA president. BMW driver. Serial microaggressor. And evidently now vehicular thief. She spotted me standing there barefoot with a Pop-Tart in one hand and a look of pure confusion on my face, and she smiled like a cat who just peed in your laundry basket. "You're welcome," she chirped, gesturing at the tow truck like it was a gift. "We're removing this eyesore. You can pick it up when you get a real job." That's when I finally registered her reasoning. Not that it made any sense, but apparently, my truck was making the neighborhood look impoverished. And she'd reported it as abandoned despite the fact that it was parked on my property, had a valid registration, and I'd literally driven it home from work the night before. Now, to the untrained eye, my truck might look like it belongs in a scrapyard love story. It's dented, the paint's peeling, and it's got more rust than a Civil War cannon. But it runs. It's mine. And more importantly, it belonged to my dad. He left it to me when he passed last year. I could afford a new one, sure, I'm a mechanical engineer working remotely on defense contracts, but I kept it because it reminds me of the guy who taught me how to change oil and punch drywall. So yeah, seeing a tow hook jammed under it because some Botoxed control freak didn't like its aesthetic, didn't exactly put me in a neighborly mood. I calmly asked the driver what the hell was going on. He looked uncomfortable. Said he had a work order submitted anonymously through the HOA's emergency complaint portal. Apparently, Karen had used her position to fast-track it as a public safety nuisance. I asked if he'd even checked the VIN or plate. He hadn't. I showed him my registration, pointed at my name on the mailbox, and suggested that if he didn't want to be paying court fees out of his Christmas bonus, he might want to lower the truck and back the hell off my driveway. Karen started shrieking about non-compliance and property standards, but the guy was already muttering apologies and retreating faster than a possum caught in a flashlight beam. As the tow truck pulled away, Karen pivoted like a politician caught in a lie. "Well, now that you're up, we need to talk about your lawn." I blinked. "The what now?" "Your lawn," she said, waving her smoothie like a royal scepter. "It's not HOA compliant. There are dandelions." I looked down at the single yellow dot peeking through the grass like it was afraid to exist. "That's a flower," I said. "It's literally edible." "So is shoe polish," she snapped. "But you don't put it in a salad." Then she stomped back to her BMW and peeled out like a fast and furious extra who just lost her car in a street race. That's when I knew this wasn't a one-time thing. Karen wasn't trying to clean up the neighborhood. She was trying to get me out. Why? I don't know. Maybe because I wasn't playing her HOA reindeer games. Maybe because I hadn't attended a single meeting since moving in. Or maybe, just maybe, because I didn't look the part. I wasn't dressed like a Lululemon ad. I didn't drive a Tesla or sip cucumber water on Wednesdays. My house was modest, my truck was ugly, and my yard had personality. And for someone like Karen, that was unacceptable. The next day, I got a notice on my door. "You are in violation of HOA Code 3.2.4 regarding visual property deterioration. You have 7 days to rectify the matter or face fines." Attached was a blurry photo of my truck, taken from across the street. I laughed, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind of laugh that only happens right before someone burns a bridge with a flamethrower. Karen had crossed a line. And if she thought she could bully me with her clipboard and passive-aggressive newsletter, she was in for a shock. Because I don't fight loud. I don't scream. I don't threaten. I do paperwork. I do research. I do revenge with a smile and receipt. That night, I pulled every HOA document I could find. Their bylaws. Their budget. Their tax filings. Yes, I said tax filings. Because it turns out our HOA was technically a non-profit, and those have public records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I'd find something. Power-hungry people always leave paper trails. And Karen? She'd been president for 6 years. There had to be a skeleton somewhere. And oh, did I find one! Nestled in the HOA's financial reports was a line item titled, Neighborhood Aesthetic Improvement Initiatives. Vague, sure. But when I compared the 2022 budget with the 2023 one, I noticed a jump. A big one. $40,000 had gone missing between March and June under that category. $40,000. For initiatives that included replacing community mailbox locks, repainting speed bumps, and, get this, upgrading the signage and entrance flora. All things that cost, at most, a couple grand. I dug deeper. Found the contractors listed for those jobs. One of them was a landscaping company owned by a guy named Trent Kowalski. A quick Google search showed that Trent wasn't just a landscaper. He was also Karen's nephew. Her unemployed, recently bankrupted nephew, whose business had exactly one client in the past year. Our HOA. The same HOA Karen managed. The same one funneling him tens of thousands for suspiciously overpriced jobs. I didn't sleep that night. I was too busy screenshotting, printing, compiling. I even called a buddy of mine in compliance law to confirm what I already suspected. If what I was seeing was accurate, and it was, Karen was misappropriating HOA funds to keep her nephew's business afloat. That wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. And now I had her right where I wanted her. But I wasn't going to confront her. No, that would be too easy. Too expected. I was going to let her keep digging her own grave. Because the best revenge is watching the person who tried to destroy you realize you were always 2 steps ahead, and the trap was already set. The next morning, I went out early just to see if Karen would dare show her face again. Sure enough, there she was. Power walking up the cul-de-sac like a suburban general inspecting her troops. Her neon sneakers squeaked against the pavement, and her lips were pursed so tight they could have sliced deli meat. She paused in front of my property like she was expecting a parade in her honor. I stood on the porch with a coffee and a smirk, letting the silence drag out until it was unbearable. Finally she spoke. Well? Have you removed that rust bucket yet? I took a sip of coffee. Nope. But I did wax it. Gave it that authentic distressed Americana look. Real popular with the Instagram crowd. She squinted at me, probably trying to decide if I was joking. I wasn't. I had actually polished the dents and cleaned the tires. If I was going to be accused of bringing down property values, I might as well do it in high definition. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was giving me a last chance before unleashing the Kraken. I'm trying to help you, you know. You don't belong here. This neighborhood has standards. And I'm exceeding them, I said, gesturing at my lawn. I'd mowed it to HOA perfection. Edges trimmed. Grass uniform. Even the lone dandelion was gone, plucked, photographed, and mailed to her anonymously with a note that said, "We will remember him." Karen narrowed her eyes. This isn't over. Oh, I know, I replied cheerfully. That's the fun part. She left in a huff, and I went back inside and fired up my laptop. Because while she was busy issuing violations over imaginary infractions, I was assembling a report. Not just about the money. About everything. I cross-referenced every aesthetic improvement the HOA funded with every address where work had supposedly taken place. Half the addresses had no visible changes. One didn't even exist. It was a vacant lot still registered to the city. I pulled neighborhood security cam footage from a friend who lived near the entrance gates. No sign of landscaping trucks on the days Karen claimed her nephew's company was working. I was building a case, but I still needed one thing to light the match: proof she'd personally authorized the payments. Then, like divine intervention, it landed in my inbox. See, I'd created a dummy email pretending to be a contractor interested in bidding for future HOA projects. I figured Karen's ego might respond to someone praising her tasteful oversight and design acumen. She replied in less than 6 hours. Gushed about how difficult it was to find loyal vendors. Said she preferred working with family where she could guarantee integrity and discretion. And then, God bless her arrogant soul, attached a PDF of the current approved vendor list. Her nephew's company was at the top. The document had her digital signature at the bottom. I read it 3 times, then laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. Karen had just emailed me her own indictment. But I wasn't done. Because there was one more card I hadn't played yet, and it involved her beloved BMW. You see, while I'd been researching HOA bylaws and vendor lists, I'd also done a little digging into Karen herself. She liked to brag about her success, her investment savvy, how she'd never lease because only broke people pay rent. But a quick search into county lien records revealed something hilarious. Karen didn't own her car. It was leased under her ex-husband's business, an LLC that had been dissolved 2 years ago. Meaning, technically, that BMW was in violation of its lease terms and, depending on insurance coverage, possibly uninsured. That was interesting. But it got better. Because I knew a guy. Specifically, I knew a repo agent. I'd helped him with his truck's engine swap last fall, and he owed me a favor. I gave him the plate and asked him to check if there were any red flags on the vehicle. A day later, he called me with the best news I'd heard all week. The car had been reported as inactive lease property and was pending repossession, but no address had been successfully located. Until now. And no, I didn't call it in. That would have been illegal. What I did do was post a very helpful for sale ad on a local forum using a fake name. The ad listed a lightly used BMW X5, white, pristine condition, parked nightly in a cul-de-sac, license ending in 421, make offer fast. I may have even uploaded a picture of it parked outside Karen's house. I figured someone might recognize the plate and pass it along to the right people. 2 days later, I was working in the garage when I heard the familiar clink of a tow chain and the unmistakable scrape of German tires being dragged. I strolled outside just in time to see Karen sprinting down her driveway in a robe and house slippers, screaming, "That's my car! You can't take that!" The tow guy, clearly having dealt with this brand of hysteria before, just pointed at his clipboard. "You're not the lessee. This vehicle's being reclaimed due to breach of contract. Call the finance company." She turned and saw me leaning against my truck. I waved. Her eyes turned into murder. "You did this," she shrieked. "You petty little man. You think this is funny?" "Karen," I said sweetly, "you tried to tow a truck you don't own from a driveway that's not yours because you didn't like how it looked. This seems like balance to me." She hurled something. It looked like a travel mug, but missed by 10 feet. Then stormed back into her house and slammed the door so hard a lawn gnome 2 houses down face-planted. I thought that would be the climax. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back off. But no. Karen wasn't the type to quit. She was the type to double down and sink with the ship. I underestimated how much. Because that night I received a letter, not from the HOA but from a lawyer. It was a cease and desist order accusing me of harassment, defamation, and interference with HOA operations. I read it 3 times. Then I called the lawyer's office and asked a very polite question. "Did your client tell you she sent this on behalf of the HOA?" The woman on the phone hesitated, then said, "Yes." "Why?" I smiled. "Because I have documents proving she's been embezzling from the HOA for over a year, and if this case goes to discovery, I'll gladly share them in court." She paused. Then said, "Thank you for your time." Click. And just like that, I realized something. Karen hadn't just tried to tow my truck because she didn't like the look of me. She'd done it because she knew something I hadn't. That I was the one person in the neighborhood who didn't care about her rules, who saw through her game, and who had absolutely nothing to lose by taking her down. And she'd just given me the perfect legal excuse to do it. 3 days after the cease and desist evaporated like Karen's last shred of self-awareness, I walked into the HOA meeting with a manila folder tucked under my arm and the calm confidence of someone who'd already won. These monthly meetings were normally dull affairs with low attendance, but tonight was standing room only. The BMW repossession had gone neighborhood viral, and everyone wanted to know what was going on. Karen, of course, sat at the head of the table like Queen Entitlement, pretending nothing was amiss. She wore a navy pantsuit like she was testifying before Congress and smiled at me with the tight, bitter curve of someone who thinks a fake grin is better than a real loss. I took a seat near the back, nodding at the few neighbors I actually liked. Mr. Levine from across the street gave me a wink and waited. Karen cleared her throat, banged her little HOA gavel like she was declaring martial law, and opened the meeting with a list of community violations. She droned on about fence heights, porch lights, and someone apparently using unapproved mulch, which apparently violated Section 5.6.1 of the neighborhood color palette. I let her finish, let her soak in the spotlight, because I was about to bulldoze her stage. When the floor opened for public comment, I stood slowly, waited for her to acknowledge me, then stepped forward and placed the manila folder on the table. "I'd like to formally request a motion to review the HOA budget from the past 2 fiscal years," I said. "Particularly the line items under Neighborhood Aesthetic Improvement Initiatives." Karen blinked. This is not the forum for that kind of request. You'd need to submit it in writing to the treasurer. "Already did," I said. "Twice. Got no response. That's why I'm doing it here, in front of the actual residents." I turned to the crowd. "Because I think they deserve to know what their dues are really funding." There was a murmur, real curiosity, and a few people pulled out their phones. Karen's voice rose an octave. "You're not on the agenda, and this is a clear attempt to derail an official meeting. I'm asking you to sit down or leave." I smiled. "Okay. I'll leave. But first..." I opened the folder and held up a copy of the vendor list she'd emailed to my fake contractor account. "This is a document signed by Karen, approving her nephew's landscaping company for nearly $40,000 worth of contracts." I flipped to the next page. "This is a financial summary showing a massive spike in spending to that company right after it filed for bankruptcy." Flip. "And this is a list of addresses where work was supposedly done, most of which never happened." Now the murmuring turned to outright chatter. Karen tried to grab the papers, but I held them out of reach. "All of this is backed up with screenshots, timestamped surveillance footage, and a very polite email thread between your HOA president and what she thought was a friendly contractor who appreciated her discretion." Karen stood up, face flushed, voice trembling with rage. "This is a smear campaign. A personal vendetta from someone who refuses to follow the rules. You think just because you drive a garbage truck with headlights, you can accuse people of crimes." I tilted my head. "Funny. I thought I was accusing a board president of financial misconduct. But if you're admitting it's personal, that's interesting." She looked like she was going to lunge at me, but before she could say anything else, someone else spoke up. "I'd like to second the motion to review the budget," said Mrs. Dunleavy, a woman I'd only ever seen tending roses and judging everyone's recycling habits. More hands went up. Then voices. A real vote was forming. Karen's control was slipping through her French manicured fingers. Seeing the tide turn, she reached for her final, desperate grenade. "This man is harassing me. He had my car towed." I turned to the crowd. Actually, the car was repossessed because it was being illegally leased under a dissolved LLC. "But thank you for reminding me. I also have documentation showing she filed a false HOA complaint to have my truck towed, lied to the tow company, and then used HOA resources to push it through faster. Gasp. One guy actually said, "Whoa," like he was watching a courtroom drama on TV. I set the folder down. If this doesn't trigger a full investigation, I'll be happy to take it to county oversight. Or the media. Or both. Karen's voice cracked. You don't belong here. People like you don't belong in communities like this. There it was. The real Karen, slipping out from behind the laminated rules and wine club smiles. People like me? I echoed. She realized her mistake. I meant, you're antagonistic. You don't respect structure. I'm what, Karen? Not rich enough? Not quiet enough? Not scared enough? Silence. Then, softly from the back, someone said, "You've gone too far, Karen." And just like that, the room shifted. The board members, previously silent and complicit, now exchanged nervous glances. One of them, Mark, the treasurer, cleared his throat and said, "I think we should table the rest of the agenda until we review this." Karen's eyes bulged like someone had unplugged her ego from its power source. I sat down, smiling, because now it was official. The audit was coming. What I didn't expect, though, was the next twist. A week later, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't Karen. It was someone worse. A man in a suit. Slim, serious, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Dalton?" he asked. "Yeah. I'm with the county investigator's office. We've received a formal complaint regarding the financial practices of your HOA. We understand you provided some of the evidence." I nodded slowly. "That's right." He handed me a business card. "You're going to need to come in for a deposition. Ms. Winters, Karen Winters, has filed a counter-complaint alleging that you accessed restricted HOA documents through fraudulent means. She's accusing you of impersonating a contractor to manipulate financial records." My blood ran cold. I had anticipated drama, rage, retaliation. But a formal counter-complaint with the county? That was new. That was dangerous. I let out a slow breath. "Let me get my lawyer." He nodded. "That'd be wise." When he left, I sat down hard on the couch. Because even though I'd played everything smart, never hacked, never lied, just asked the right questions, I knew how bureaucracy worked. Karen was weaponizing the system, turning the rules into a cudgel. And even if I was clean, I'd now be dragged through weeks, maybe months, of interviews, paperwork, and stress. She was trying to wear me down. Force me to settle. Force me to back off. But she didn't know one thing. My father had once been dragged through something similar by a corrupt employer. And I watched him fight it for 2 years, quietly, methodically, without ever losing his cool. He'd taught me one thing above all. Never swing wild. Just wait for them to open their guard, and then hit the nerve. So I didn't panic. Instead, I made 2 calls. First, to my lawyer. I sent him every document, every screenshot, every file I had. We prepped for the deposition. Lined everything up. Then, I made a second call. To the IRS. Because if Karen thought county investigators were scary, she had no idea what was coming next. Karen must have thought she was clever, filing that counter-complaint. She probably envisioned me crumbling under pressure, withdrawing the accusations, maybe even issuing some mealy-mouthed apology at the next HOA meeting while she reclaimed her throne like nothing ever happened. But I had no intention of backing down. Not when I was this close to watching her empire burn, and certainly not when she'd escalated it to the legal level. I was done playing defense. It was time to bring out the real artillery. My deposition with the county investigator was short, professional, and honestly kind of uneventful. I came armed with binders, labeled and tabbed, containing every interaction I'd had with Karen and the HOA. Screenshot, emails, the fake contractor inquiry with her response. Everything was time-stamped and backed up in triplicate. My lawyer, a friend from college who now lived for moments like these, just sat beside me with a smile that said, I dare you to blink wrong. The investigator asked questions, nodded a lot, and thanked me for my time. When we left the building, he shook my hand and said, "Between you and me, I don't think you'll be the one in trouble when this is over." But that wasn't the highlight of my week. The highlight came 3 days later, when my anonymous tip to the IRS got a call back. Not to me, of course, but to Karen. The thing about HOA presidents who embezzle funds and funnel money through a bankrupt nephew's business is, they almost never report the income. Especially not when they're paying out tens of thousands in contractor fees for work that doesn't exist. And the IRS, bless their cold, calculating hearts, don't take kindly to that sort of thing. I didn't hear about the investigation directly, but I didn't need to. It started as a whisper in the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone saw a government sedan parked outside Karen's house. Then someone else said she hadn't been seen walking in the mornings, which for Karen was like the Pope skipping Massachusetts. The real confirmation came when Mark, the treasurer, quietly stepped down from the HOA board and posted a very neutral message about needing to focus on family. That's code for, I don't want to get dragged into a federal audit. Now, I expected Karen to go quiet. Maybe hide out. Lawyer up. But of course not. This was Karen. She didn't understand the concept of retreat. Instead, she went full scorched earth. Flyers appeared on mailboxes accusing me of fraud. She wrote a letter to the neighborhood claiming I was trying to destabilize the community for personal gain. She even suggested I was planning to sue the HOA in a predatory scheme to extort settlement money. She framed herself as the victim of a calculated smear campaign orchestrated by, get this, a disgruntled resident with a known history of antagonism and mechanical hoarding. Mechanical hoarding. She meant my truck. She even tried to call a special emergency vote to have me forcibly removed from the neighborhood for non-compliance with community values. Which isn't a real rule, by the way. But Karen's world isn't built on rules. It's built on imagined authority and blind intimidation. I was ready to let her wear herself out. But then she made the biggest mistake yet. She hosted a community fundraiser. It was advertised as a casual Saturday morning event. Just coffee, donuts, and a few local vendors selling candles and soap on folding tables. Nothing fancy. Except it was being held in the HOA clubhouse, a private facility, on HOA property, and she charged admission, $5 a head, cash only. No receipts, no permits, no records. Now, if you're a normal person, that's just shady. But if you're already under investigation for misappropriating nonprofit funds and failing to disclose income, that's blood in the water. I showed up to the fundraiser wearing the same outfit Karen once told me made me look like a roadie for a garage band, ripped jeans, a faded concert tee, and my dad's old trucker hat. I paid my $5, got my little paper wristband, and walked inside like I was just another local sniffing lavender soap. But what I was really doing was recording. Video. Audio. Karen at the welcome table, pocketing cash. Karen collecting vendor booth fees in envelopes. Karen telling a vendor that this was off the books. Then I walked out, emailed the files to my IRS contact, and went home. I didn't hear anything for a full week. Long enough for me to start wondering if I'd pushed it too far. Long enough to start calculating the odds of Karen surviving this with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Then came Thursday. Karen's BMW didn't just vanish this time. It was towed again, this time with a law enforcement escort. I saw it from my living room window. A second vehicle, an unmarked SUV, was parked out front, and 2 agents walked right up to Karen's door. I couldn't hear what they said, but her voice carried like a banshee across the cul-de-sac. She screamed, slammed the door, opened it again, then slammed it a second time for emphasis. An hour later, movers arrived. Not official ones. Just 2 guys in a beat-up U-Haul who didn't make eye contact with anyone. They carried out boxes, lamps, artwork, the HOA gavel. One neighbor said she saw Karen crying in her garage, holding what looked like a stack of unpaid invoices. Another said they heard her screaming on the phone about being targeted by the deep state. By sunset, she was gone. No goodbye. No statement. No apology. Just gone. A week later, the HOA board announced an emergency re-election for president and treasurer. Karen's name was officially removed from all documents. Her nephew's landscaping company quietly shut down, and an audit revealed nearly $70,000 in questionable expenses, most of which couldn't be accounted for. I didn't run for HOA president. I didn't want the power. That wasn't the point. But when the new board reached out and asked me to help them rework the financial policies, I agreed. On one condition: no one ever tries to tow my truck again. They laugh. I didn't. But that wasn't quite the end. Because 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in shaky cursive. Inside was a single photo. My truck, parked in my driveway. A red circle drawn around it in Sharpie. And a note scrawled underneath. This neighborhood deserves better. No signature. But I didn't need one. Karen might have vanished. But some people never really leave. They just haunt the paperwork. Still, I taped the photo to the inside of my garage and added a sticky note next to it. This truck outlasted you. I didn't hear from Karen for a while after that note, at least, not directly. But she was still there, lurking like mildew in the corners of the neighborhood's collective memory. Her legacy didn't just vanish the moment the movers closed the U-Haul. It lingered in the unearthed budget discrepancies, in the whispered gossip at mailbox clusters, and especially in the fresh batch of homeowners suddenly discovering they'd been fined for violations that never existed. The new board spent weeks unraveling the mess she left behind: bogus citations, missing invoices, entire expense categories labeled things like seasonal ambience that somehow added up to 4 digits. The clubhouse had apparently paid $600 for decorative pebbles 1 month. Decorative pebbles. But the real twist, the one no one saw coming, hit when the board discovered that Karen hadn't actually resigned from the HOA. She'd only stepped away temporarily. It was a technicality buried deep in the bylaws. A clause she'd slipped in during a previous rules amendment vote, likely approved by board residents who just wanted the meeting to end. The clause allowed the president to appoint an interim replacement during periods of personal leave, while retaining the right to return once the leave concluded, pending a majority vote. There had been no formal resignation letter, just a sudden disappearance and a trail of chaos. Which meant, if she wanted, Karen could come back. And 3 weeks later, she did. Not in person. Not yet. But through a proxy. A man named Glenn Becker showed up at the next board meeting. Bald, sunburned, smelled like cinnamon gum and lawsuit. Claimed he was Karen's legal advocate and property manager, acting on her behalf while she recovered from what he described as a period of extreme personal hardship and systemic persecution. He brought with him a typed letter, signed by Karen, requesting reinstatement of her HOA presidency effective immediately, and asserting her right to resume duties under Clause 4.7.2 of the bylaws. It was legal. Technically. Barely. The room erupted in protest. Neighbors who hadn't said a word during her entire reign suddenly found their voices. Someone actually shouted, "She tried to tow my dog," which I'm still not sure was literal or just metaphor. But Glenn remained calm, smug even. He handed out printouts of the clause, then sat down like he was waiting for a flight upgrade. The new board panicked. They weren't lawyers. They weren't ready. And Karen, being Karen, had lined up her return in a way that caught everyone off guard. She knew the neighborhood's attention span. She knew the outrage would fade faster than paperwork moved. She was counting on apathy to win again. But she'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't done. After the meeting, I went straight home and pulled out the digital folder I'd named Operation HOA Cleanse. I hadn't planned to reopen it, but now? It was war again. I started by doing what Karen never expected. I followed the rules. I filed a formal petition to amend the bylaws, specifically, to eliminate the clause that allowed presidents to step away and return without a public vote. I cited abuse of power, recent financial mismanagement, and precedent for reform based on other HOAs in the county. Then I canvassed, house to house. No flyers, no mass emails. I looked people in the eye and explained, calmly and simply, what was at stake. You want peace? Vote for the amendment. You want your dues spent on actual improvements, not someone's nephew's fake company? Vote for the amendment. You want Karen gone for good? You get the idea. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was tedious. I spent 2 weeks knocking on doors, answering questions, listening to stories about past HOA grievances that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with why people didn't trust their own board anymore. One guy told me Karen had cited him for having too many wind chimes. Another had been fined for an unapproved porch chair that turned out to be part of the original house design. Karen had been ruling like a queen in a democracy, and nobody had stopped her. Until now. By the time the vote came around, I had 72 signatures. I only needed 65. The board called a special session. Karen, through Glenn, attempted to block the vote, citing procedural delays and questionable motives from the petitioner, me. But the board had grown a spine since her departure. They reviewed the petition, checked the signatures, and set the vote for the following week. That night, I received another envelope. No name. Same handwriting. This one had a single sentence. You think you've won, but you don't understand who I know. I didn't even bother getting angry. Karen wasn't threatening me. She was threatening everyone. Because that's all she had left, fear. On voting day, the clubhouse was packed. People stood in the back. Neighbors brought their kids. It felt less like an HOA vote and more like a final battle. The room buzzed with quiet tension. Glenn was there, arms crossed, seated near the front with a smug expression like he already knew the outcome. I stood in the corner, sipping water, pretending not to care. Then the ballots were counted. The amendment passed. 82 votes in favor. 14 against. The clause was repealed. Effective immediately. Karen's claim to the presidency was dead. Her final foothold in the neighborhood was gone. And just like that, it was over. No more letters. No more BMW drama. No more threats scrawled in Sharpie. Karen's house went up for sale a month later. Listed by a discount agency. The grass grew long. The shutters faded. No one ever saw her return, not even to pack. The locks were changed by a bank contractor. A for sale sign sat slanted in the yard like it was embarrassed to be there. Eventually, a young couple with a toddler moved in. They planted a tree. Painted the door a soft green. Their kid likes to wave at my truck every morning. And the truck? Still runs. Still rusted. Still mine. The new HOA board installed a transparency policy. Public budget. Open meetings. I still don't go, unless there's barbecue. But I helped draft the ethics code, and I check the website once a month, just in case someone gets ambitious again. Because I learned something from Karen. Power doesn't have to be loud to be dangerous. It just has to go unchecked. And the best revenge isn't towing someone's car, or mailing anonymous threats, or weaponizing bylaws. The best revenge is being the reason someone like her can never come back. The best revenge is peace. Hard-earned, rust-covered, absolutely legal peace.